Marcie Sanders had always been a morning person, which worked perfectly for her job as a barista at Sunrise Cafe, a cozy little coffee shop nestled in a bustling downtown corner. Despite her early shifts and modest paycheck, she loved her work. There was something magical about the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversations that filled the shop every morning. For Marcie, the cafe wasn't just a place where drinks were made. It was a sanctuary where people connected, a place where even the smallest gestures could make someone's day better. This particular Tuesday morning was colder than usual. Frost etched delicate patterns on the windows, and Marcie had already seen more than one customer come in shivering, their hands tucked deep into their coat pockets. She'd been on her feet since 5 a.m., pouring lattes and cappuccinos, greeting regulars with her usual bright smile. But as the clock ticked closer to noon, the rush of commuters and office workers began to dwindle. Marcie took a moment to wipe down the counter, relishing the brief quiet. That's when she noticed him. The man stood just outside the window, his coat too thin for the biting cold, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He wasn't looking at the menu or the customers inside. He wasn't even glancing at his phone. Instead, his gaze rested on the ground, as though he was lost in thought or perhaps lost altogether. Marcie hesitated for only a moment before acting. She grabbed a clean mug, filled it with the day's house blend, and added a splash of cream. Without saying a word to her manager, she slipped from behind the counter and opened the door, the winter air rushing in like an unwelcome guest. "Hi there," she said, holding out the steaming mug. "You look like you could use something warm." The man startled, his eyes snapping up to meet hers. They were a deep, weathered brown, the kind that seemed to hold a story. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but Marcie cut him off with a reassuring smile. "It's on the house," she added. "Consider it a small act of kindness." The man took the mug, his fingers curling around it as though it were a lifeline. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to." "I don't worry about it," Marcie said gently. "Take your time. Warm up." He nodded, his expression a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Marcie couldn't quite place. She watched as he moved to a bench just outside the cafe and took a cautious sip, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Marcie returned to the counter, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She hadn't done much, really, but it felt good to know she'd made even a small difference in someone's day. She didn't expect to see the man again. But hours later, as she was finishing her shift, he walked back into the cafe. This time, he wasn't alone. Marcie looked up, surprised to see the man standing in the doorway. Beside him was a woman, her face thin but kind, and behind her, a boy no older than 8. The boy clutched a worn backpack, his wide eyes scanning the room with curiosity. "Excuse me," the man said, stepping forward. His voice was steadier now. "I just wanted to thank you again. And well, I thought you should know you didn't just give me coffee. You reminded me that people care. I wanted to introduce you to my family." Marcie blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected her simple gesture to mean so much, let alone lead to this moment. The woman offered her a shy smile, and the boy waved hesitantly. "It's nice to meet you all," Marcie said, her heart swelling. "I'm Marcie. Can I get you anything?" "On the house, of course." The man hesitated but nodded. Maybe just a cup of coffee for her, and a hot chocolate for him. As Marcie prepared their drinks, the man explained. His name was Daniel, and he'd been out of work for months. They'd been staying at a nearby shelter while he looked for a way to get back on his feet. That morning, he'd felt hopeless, overwhelmed by the weight of his circumstances. "Your kindness," he said, glancing down at his coffee, "it reminded me that there's still good in the world. It gave me the courage to keep going." Marcie listened, humbled and moved. She didn't know what to say, so she simply handed them their drinks and wished them well. But as she watched the little family leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next day, Marcie found herself thinking about Daniel and his family as she worked the morning shift. She wondered where they were, if they were okay, and whether that small moment of warmth had truly made a difference in their lives. As much as she wanted to believe in the power of kindness, she also knew how daunting it could be to climb out of hardship. Around mid-morning, just as the rush was tapering off, a regular customer named Miss Everett walked in. A retired school teacher in her 70s, Mrs. Everett was one of Marcie's favorite patrons. She always ordered the same thing, Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk, and had a knack for brightening the day with her cheerful chatter. Today, however, Mrs. Everett seemed distracted. As Marcie prepared her tea, She noticed the older woman staring out the window, her brow furrowed. "Everything all right, Mrs. Everett?" Marcie asked, sliding the tea across the counter. "Oh, it's nothing, dear," Mrs. Everett replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I just saw a young family outside and they looked so cold. The boy didn't even have gloves. I was about to go talk to them, but they disappeared around the corner." Marcie's heart skipped a beat. Did the man have dark hair and brown eyes? She asked. And the boy, was he carrying a backpack? "Yes, that's them," Mrs. Everett said, surprised. "Do you know them?" Marcie quickly recounted her encounter with Daniel and his family the day before. By the time she finished, Mrs. Everett was nodding thoughtfully. "Kindness like that has a way of rippling out," she said. "Perhaps I could help too. There's a community center near my building that runs a job placement program and offers free childcare. Maybe they'd be interested." Marcie smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "That's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Everett. I think they'd be grateful." That evening, as Marcie left the cafe, she decided to take a detour to the shelter Daniel had mentioned. She didn't have much to offer. Her paycheck barely covered rent and groceries, but she packed a bag with a few spare scarves and gloves from her closet, as well as some non-perishable snacks. When she arrived, she was relieved to find Daniel and his family in the lobby. "Marcie." Daniel greeted her, surprised but pleased. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to check in," she said, handing him the bag. "And I met someone today who might be able to help. There's a community center that offers job placement programs. I can give you the details if you're interested." Daniel's eyes lit up, and his wife, Sarah, stepped forward, her expression a mix of gratitude and hope. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "We've been looking for something like that." The next morning, Marcie connected Miss Everett with Daniel and Sarah, and within days, they had their first meeting at the community center. Daniel enrolled in the job placement program, while Sarah began volunteering in the center's kitchen, which provided meals to families in need. Their son, Tyler, joined a free after-school program where he made fast friends and caught up on his homework. Marcie was thrilled to see them making progress, but what happened next was something she could never have anticipated. 2 weeks later, a stranger walked into Sunrise Cafe during Marcie's shift. He was tall, sharply dressed, and carried an air of confidence that immediately drew attention. Marcie greeted him with her usual warmth, though she couldn't help but feel a little intimidated by his polished demeanor. "Are you Marcie Sanders?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. "Yes, that's me," she replied, puzzled. The man introduced himself as Jonathan Pierce, the director of the community center. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. "Daniel and Sarah told me how your kindness set everything in motion for them. I wanted to meet the person who started this incredible chain of events." Marcie blushed, feeling both flattered and slightly overwhelmed. "I didn't do much," she said. "I just gave him a cup of coffee." Jonathan smiled. "Sometimes it's the smallest actions that have the biggest impact. Thanks to your gesture, Daniel secured a job interview, and Sarah has become an integral part of our volunteer team. They wanted me to thank you in person and to invite you to an event we're hosting next week." Marcie hesitated. "What kind of event?" "It's a fundraiser," Jonathan explained. "We're raising money to expand our programs, and Daniel and Sarah will be sharing their story. I think it would mean a lot to them if you came." Marcie agreed, though she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this was all happening too fast. She was just an ordinary barista, after all. What did she have to do with a fundraiser or a community movement? She didn't yet realize how much more her simple act of kindness would ripple outward, touching lives in ways she never could have imagined. The night of the fundraiser arrived faster than Marcie expected. The event was held in a large hall at the community center, and by the time she walked in, the room was already buzzing with activity. Strings of lights cast a warm glow, and tables lined with baked goods, crafts, and silent auction items added a cheerful touch to the atmosphere. Marcie felt slightly out of place in her simple sweater and jeans, but the warm smiles of the attendees quickly put her at ease. Jonathan greeted her at the entrance, shaking her hand firmly. "I'm so glad you could make it," he said, ushering her inside. "Daniel and Sarah are already here. They're excited to see you." Marcie scanned the room and spotted them near the stage. Daniel looked more put together than she remembered, wearing a neatly pressed shirt, and Sarah glowed with newfound confidence. Tyler clung to his mother's side, grinning as he chatted with another child. "Marcie," Daniel exclaimed when he saw her. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, pulling her into a brief but heartfelt hug. "I can't thank you enough for coming." I wouldn't miss it, she said, smiling. You all look amazing. How's everything going? Sarah joined them, her eyes bright with emotion. Better than we could have hoped, she said. Daniel starts his new job next week, and Tyler loves his after-school program. And I've been learning so much in the kitchen here. It feels like we're finally moving forward. Marcie felt a lump rise in her throat. She was thrilled for them, but she couldn't shake the feeling that all of this was somehow beyond her. Surely their determination and resilience had carried them through, not a single cup of coffee on a cold morning. As the evening progressed, Marcie wandered through the room, marveling at the sense of community. She recognized Mrs. Everett at a table, chatting animatedly with other volunteers, and exchanged waves with a few familiar faces from the cafe. It was clear that the center was more than just a building, it was a lifeline, connecting people who might otherwise have felt invisible. When the speeches began, Marcie took a seat near the back, not expecting to be called out. But to her surprise, Jonathan stepped up to the microphone and opened his remarks with her name. Tonight we celebrate the power of community, he said, his voice carrying through the room. And it all started with a small act of kindness. Marcie Sanders, would you mind standing up for a moment? Marcie felt her cheeks flush as heads turned in her direction. She stood hesitantly, her heart racing. Marcie didn't know Daniel or his family, Jonathan continued. She didn't know their struggles, their fears, or their dreams. But she saw a man in need, and offered him a cup of coffee. That simple gesture reminded Daniel that he wasn't alone, and it set off a chain of events that brought us here tonight. The room erupted into applause, and Marcie sat down quickly, overwhelmed by the attention. She glanced at Daniel and Sarah, who beamed at her from the front row, and felt a flicker of pride mingled with disbelief. Could it really be that something so small had made such a difference? The highlight of the evening came when Daniel and Sarah took the stage to share their story. They spoke candidly about their struggles, the nights they spent wondering if they'd ever find stability again, and the moments of despair that threatened to overwhelm them. But they also spoke of hope, of the kindness of strangers, the support of the community center, and the belief that better days were possible. Marcie reminded me that even when you feel invisible, someone sees you, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. And sometimes that's all it takes to keep going. The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. Marcie felt tears prick her eyes, her chest tight with emotion. She realized then that kindness wasn't just a fleeting act. It was a seed, planted in the soil of someone's life, with the potential to grow into something extraordinary. As the event wound down, Marcie lingered near the dessert table, helping herself to a brownie. She was approached by a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Hi," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Lisa Carter. I run a small catering business, and I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcie shook her hand, puzzled. "Nice to meet you. What's this about?" Lisa smiled. "I heard about what you did for Daniel and Sarah. It's inspiring, and it got me thinking. I've been looking to expand my team, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested in a position. I know you work at the cafe, but if you're open to a change, I'd love to have someone like you on board." Marcie blinked, taken aback. "Me? But I don't have any catering experience." "I'm not worried about that," Lisa said warmly. "What matters to me is your heart. People like you make the workplace better, and I'd be happy to teach you the rest." Marcie hesitated, the offer spinning in her mind. She loved her job at the cafe, but the idea of trying something new and being part of a business that aligned with her values was tempting. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice tinged with uncertainty but also hope. Lisa handed her a business card. "Take your time, and no matter what you decide, keep being who you are. The world needs more people like you." As Marcie left the event that night, the stars shining brightly overhead, she felt a quiet sense of awe. She had walked into the fundraiser as a simple barista, and she was leaving with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. Little did she know this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Marcie stared at Lisa Carter's business card as it sat on her kitchen table the next morning. She'd read it so many times that she could recite the name and number by heart, but she still hadn't worked up the courage to call. Change was exciting, but it was also terrifying. Sunrise Cafe had been her home for years, a place where she felt safe and valued. Could she really walk away from that? She sighed and set the card aside, turning her attention to the other things she'd brought home from the fundraiser, a thank you note from Daniel and Sarah. It was handwritten, the paper slightly crinkled, as though they'd carried it with them for a while before giving it to her. Dear Marcie, thank you for believing in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. Your kindness gave us the strength to take the first step, and now we're finally moving forward. We'll never forget what you did for us, and we hope we can pay it forward someday. With gratitude. Daniel, Sarah, and Tyler. Marcie felt a lump rise in her throat. She wasn't used to being the center of attention or being credited for such profound change. But as she reread the note, she realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about what could happen when people cared for one another, even in small ways. That afternoon, she decided to visit the community center again. It had been a week since the fundraiser, and she was curious to see how things were progressing. When she arrived, she found the center bustling with activity. Volunteers were sorting donations, children were playing in the activity room, and the smell of freshly cooked meals wafted from the kitchen. Marcie, Sarah called out, waving her over. She was wearing an apron, her hands dusted with flour. I was hoping you'd stop by. Marcie smiled. I thought I'd check in. How's everything going? Better than ever, Sarah said, her face glowing with happiness. Daniel started his new job yesterday, and Tyler's been doing great in school. He even said he wants to join the art club. That's amazing, Marcie said, genuinely thrilled. I'm so happy for you. Sarah hesitated, then added, and I wanted to tell you we've decided to pay it forward. Daniel and I are working with the center to start a mentoring program for families who are going through what we went through. It's our way of making sure your kindness keeps spreading. Marcie felt a swell of pride and admiration. That's incredible. You're going to help so many people. We hope so, Sarah said, and we couldn't have done it without you. As Marcie left the center, she found herself thinking about Lisa's offer again. She realized that her fear of change wasn't just about leaving the cafe. It was about stepping into the unknown, taking a leap of faith, and trusting herself to adapt. But wasn't that exactly what Daniel and Sarah had done? They had taken a chance, and it had transformed their lives. The next morning, Marcie called Lisa. A week later, Marcie found herself standing in the kitchen of Lisa's catering business, wearing a crisp white apron and nervously clutching a notepad. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the team bustled around her, preparing for an upcoming event. Lisa greeted her with a warm smile. Ready for your first day? As ready as I'll ever be, Marcie replied, trying to sound confident. Lisa introduced her to the team, showing her how to take inventory, prep ingredients, and assemble simple hors d'oeuvres. It was overwhelming at first. There was so much to learn, but Marcie quickly discovered that her experience as a barista had prepared her well. She already knew how to stay organized, work quickly under pressure, and make customers feel valued. By the end of the day, Marcie felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. She still had a lot to learn, but she was beginning to see how this new path could be just as fulfilling as her time at the cafe. Meanwhile, the ripples of Marcie's kindness continued to spread. The mentoring program Daniel and Sarah started gained traction quickly, drawing in other families who had once been in similar situations. Mrs. Everett volunteered to tutor children in reading and math, and the community center received an outpouring of support from local businesses inspired by the fundraiser's success. Word of the program reached the local news, and soon, Sunrise Cafe was buzzing with customers who'd heard about the barista who started it all. Marcie's former coworkers proudly told anyone who asked about her, sharing stories of her generosity and compassion. One morning, Marcie returned to the cafe for a visit. The familiar smell of coffee beans and the cheerful chatter of customers made her feel instantly at home. Her former manager, Linda, greeted her with a big hug. "We miss you around here," Linda said, handing her a cup of her favorite latte. "But I hear you're doing amazing things." Marcie smiled, taking a sip. "I couldn't have done it without this place. It taught me the value of connecting with people." As she sat at her favorite corner table, watching the world go by, Marcie felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had no idea where this new journey would lead, but she knew one thing for certain: kindness had changed her life as much as it had changed Daniel's, and for that she would always be thankful. Marcie settled into her new routine at Lisa's catering business with growing confidence. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding. Every day brought new experiences, from learning intricate plating techniques to collaborating with the team on creative menace. Over time, Marcie began to realize that her passion wasn't just about coffee or food. It was about the way these simple things brought people together. One afternoon, Lisa approached Marcie while they were setting up for a wedding reception. I've been meaning to talk to you, Lisa said, her tone both casual and serious. You've been doing incredible work here. The clients love you, the team loves you, and I can see how much care you put into everything you do. Marcie felt her cheeks warm. Thank you, Lisa. That means a lot. Lisa leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I think you're ready for more responsibility. How would you feel about managing some of our smaller events? It's not just about the food, it's about creating an experience, and I think you'd be amazing at it. Marcie blinked, momentarily speechless. Me? Are you sure? Lisa smiled. Absolutely. You have a natural way of connecting with people, Marcie. That's rare. And it's exactly what this business needs. Think about it. Marcie nodded, her mind spinning. She had never seen herself as a leader, but Lisa's faith in her was infectious. That evening, as Marcie walked home, she passed by the community center. She decided to stop in, curious about how Daniel and Sarah's mentoring program was coming along. Inside, she found the center buzzing with activity. Daniel stood at the front of a room, leading a workshop on resume writing, while Sarah helped a young mother soothe her crying baby. Tyler was seated at a table nearby, painting a colorful landscape with a group of other children. Marcie. Sarah called, waving her over. It's so good to see you. We've been meaning to tell you we had our first success story. One of the families we've been working with just moved into their own apartment. That's incredible, Marcie said, her heart swelling with pride. It's all thanks to the support we've gotten, Sarah added. And it all started with you. Marcie shook her head. You give me too much credit. This is your hard work, your dedication. Sarah smiled knowingly. Maybe. But your kindness reminded us that we could do this. That's something we'll never forget. As Marcie left the center, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Lisa's offer to manage events now seemed less daunting. If she could help create moments that brought people joy and connection, just as she had at the cafe and now through the community center, it would be worth every challenge. Months passed and Marcie flourished in her new role. She discovered a talent for planning events that felt personal and meaningful, from intimate birthday parties to large corporate gatherings. Her attention to detail and genuine care for her clients earned her a reputation that spread quickly. One day, Lisa pulled Marcie aside after a successful charity gala. I've been thinking, Lisa began, about expanding the business. We've had so many requests lately that I can't keep up. I'd like to open a second location, and I want you to run it. Marcie's eyes widened. Lisa, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lisa said with a grin. You've proven yourself more than capable. I trust you completely. Marcie hesitated, the weight of the decision settling over her. But as she thought back to the journey that had brought her here from the cafe to the community center to this moment, she realized that every step had prepared her for this. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady. I'd be honored. The new location opened 6 months later, a small but elegant space designed to host everything from workshops to pop-up dinners. Marcie poured her heart into every detail, from the menu to the decor. On opening night, the space was filled with familiar faces. Lisa, her former co-workers from the cafe, Mrs. Everett, and of course, Daniel, Sarah, and Tyler. As Marcie stood at the center of the room, thanking everyone for their support, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She thought about the cold morning when she had offered Daniel a cup of coffee, never imagining how much it would change both their lives. After the applause died down, Daniel approached her with a shy smile. We brought you something, he said, handing her a small potted plant. It's a jasmine, Sarah explained. We thought it was fitting. Your kindness has a way of blooming wherever it's planted. Marcie held the pot close, her eyes misting. Thank you. This means so much to me. As the night wound down, Marcie stood by the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle in the distance. She thought about how far she had come not just in her career, but in her understanding of what truly mattered. Kindness, she realized, wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about being present, seeing people for who they were, and believing in their potential. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to embrace it, one small act of kindness at a time.